everybody. Welcome once again to Edge of Reality TV. I'm Willie Hassel, and this is, of course, the lovely Lynn Nickerson.
Good evening, Willie.
How are you?
I'm doing just
Also
fine.
the mystical Lynn Nickerson.
Oh, yeah.
And what's the other one?
I don't
Mysterious Lynn Nickerson.
It's been a while.
It's been a while, yeah. But you're still mystical and mysterious and lovely.
Thank you very much.
So how are you?
Doing great.
Doing great?
Yes.
All right, good. I like to hear that.
Yes.
So what do you want to do tonight since we're here?
Well, I was thinking maybe we could talk about our trip to Henniker, but maybe introduce our guest first
Yeah, we should probably do that.
and keep everybody intrigued as to why we went to Henniker.
Yeah. Why would we go to Henniker anyways?
There's an old legend that just won't die.
Ooh, an old legend that just won't die.
It has to do with ghosts.
Ghosts? Are you sure? Hey, tonight on the show, we welcome our good friend, Jeremy D'Entremont. Jeremy is a paranormal investigator and author of more than 20 books. He is most well known for his work with lighthouses and investigating haunted lighthouses. He is a historian for the American Lighthouse Foundation. He is the founder of the Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses. He has given lectures from Maine to California, as well as appearing on PBS, the History Channel, the Travel Channel, and National Public Radio. He has even appeared on an episode of the hit TV series Ghost Hunters. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay. Tonight, though, he is here to talk about the tale of Ocean-born Mary. Welcome to the show, Jeremy.
Thank you so much.
Welcome,
nice to see
Jeremy. You get around, don't you?
I
Wow.
do, yeah.
California to Ireland.
Well, I have to
Yeah.
admit, the lecture in California was one time. I was
So?
yeah,
You were
but
there.
it counts.
You
yeah.
went?
It does. And you also traveled the West Coast, checking out lighthouses
Yeah,
and taking pictures.
that was when I did the lecture out there
Yeah.
in Monterey. I lectured, but I flew out to San Diego, drove up the whole West Coast for a month up into British Columbia. Saw over
Beautiful.
60 lighthouses. So that
Nice,
was a
nice
fantastic
trip. Nice
yeah.
trip. Yeah.
And you wrote a book from
I did
from
write
that
a book
trip.
on West Coast lighthouses.
Yeah, West Coast lighthouses. Well, I've got to ask you then. I really enjoyed the intrigue, researching all of this information, because I didn't only read your book, then I started cross-referencing to see what other people had written, and every other rendition had something different in it. Not everybody was in agreement on everything. So you
Yeah.
really had to dig deep to try and get some answers.
Well, that's what I tried to do, yeah, when I wrote the book.
Say not
So-
everybody was in agreement. Was anybody in agreement?
Well, yeah, they were in agreement on a few facts, and Jeremy did establish that we'll cover. But I wanted to know, you're not a disbeliever in the paranormal. So what was it that prompted you to start this investigation about Mary Wilson Wallace?
Well, what happened was it was kind of, I would call it serendipity, because it worked out really well, but it wasn't something I planned on. I grew up knowing about the Ocean-born Mary story. Before we started here, you asked me if I remembered the stories being around in the
Yes.
60s, which I
Yeah.
do. I grew up in Lynn, Mass, and at that time, one of my best friends was into ghost stuff, and he and his family visited the Ocean-born Mary house. I remember him telling me about it, and it was like in hushed tones, you know, like it was the scariest place in the world. We went to the Ocean-born Mary house.
You never know who's going to make fun of you either, talking about ghosts.
Yeah, but I was into it too. So
Yeah.
so that's when I first knew about it. But then, you know, many years later, obviously, a little more than 10 years ago, somebody from the History Channel contacted me. There was a woman in the Portsmouth area where I live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. There was a woman who was going to write a book on Ocean-born Mary, but she was too busy, I guess, and said she couldn't do it. So she recommended me as a possibility, another author in the area who might be interested. So they contacted me, and I had to think about it a little bit, but I thought, well, you know, it's perfect.
Well, the History Channel, you say? Did you say the History Channel or History Press?
History Press. There's nothing to do with TV. Nothing
Oh,
to do
sure.
with-
Then-
I've
'cause
been
I
on
was
the History
wondering,
Channel before.
Were you going to be
Did I say History
consultant?
Channel? I might have said
I
that.
thought you did, yeah.
Yeah.
I probably did, but I meant, you were supposed to know that I meant History Press.
Well, I was thinking
supposed to be
maybe
psychic.
they were going to hire you to be a consultant on something that they were going to do regarding her. That's what I was thinking.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, But first of all, you have to listen to what I mean, not what I say. You
Oh,
have
of
to remember that.
course.
But a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago or so, I was contacted by the History Press, and they were doing a show on Oceanborn Mary. So since I wrote the book, they contacted me to be in it.
Oh, did they?
I
He
spent a
meant the
couple of
History
days
Channel
with them.
this time.
Did I say the History Press?
you
You
this
said
time?
Press.
did, you did. But you do mean the
Reverse
channel.
them. Reverse them.
Okay.
The History
I'm gonna
History
try and
Channel.
follow this.
I promise from now on I'll be careful. But the History Channel contacted me. They were doing a show on Oceanborn Mary, so they had me for a couple of days, and they shot like hours with me talking to the host of the show. They cut me out of the show because they didn't like what I had to say, because it didn't fit in with the premise that they were basing the show on.
And what was that? All
That there's a
ghosts?
house in Rhode Island. We might be jumping ahead of the story a little bit here, but there's a house in Rhode Island that was moved from Londonderry, New Hampshire.
Right,
that
but she only lived there for a short period of time.
well, she may not have lived there at all. I
Oh.
don't think she really did. I kind
don't?
of hedged my bets in the book a little bit on that. But the people down there in Little Compton, Rhode Island, call it the Seaborn Mary House, and they
Yeah.
say that she lived there, and they say she haunts it. And I didn't want to dispute that, so I tried to be careful. But anyway, they cut me out of
I
the show.
vaguely remember that show. Who was the host on that? You remember?
I wish I could tell you his name. It's
Yeah.
I kind of blocked it out because of because of what happened.
Well, the problem is there could be haunted stories, and it might not be the Mary. It might be one of the relatives of the Wilson, because it was a Wilson house, right?
Who knows? Who knows? Yes.
There are a lot of
Yes.
possibilities.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
As you said, I have an open mind on these things. But anyway,
So that's
sort
how
of a
you got
tangent. But anyway, the History Press asked me if I would wanted to write this book, and at the time I was running tours from Portsmouth, minivan tours to lighthouses.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Did that for like 11 years, but the winter was my off season. So that became my primary project for that off season, and I spent several months really digging into the story. And writing.
Is that all it took you, just several months, like you wrote it within a year?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah, I would say the several months of intense research, and I think it was about a year to write the whole thing.
And you did go to Henniker to dig through documents there?
I did, but the actual Mary, who was a real person, although there are many legends connected to her life, lived most of her life in Londonderry, New Hampshire. She only lived the last part of her life in Henniker.
Yeah,
but it is
18
often
years, 16 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, her story is often associated with Henniker.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with who the real Mary was.
Sure. Yeah, she was a real person, and we don't know a whole lot about her, but we do. I'll tell you the basic facts that we do know. Her name was Mary Wilson, as you said. She was born at sea, hence the name or nickname Oceanborn Mary. She was born at sea in 1720. In the summer of 1720, her parents were Scottish, and they lived in the northern part of Ireland, and what's called the Ulster region of Ireland.
Right.
And there were many Scottish people living in Ulster.
And that was
Ireland
an
at that
Ulster
time.
County, right? There wasn't a town called Ulster.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, it was like the northern third of Ireland.
Okay.
And a lot of that is now Northern Ireland, of course, which is part of the UK,
Yeah.
but that wasn't not at that time. But a lot of the Irish had been kind of wiped out from that area by the English.
Yeah.
With a war that had just happened, and a lot of the Irish chieftains were killed and so forth. So it was largely depopulated. The king he thought it was a good idea to have a lot of Scottish people move there. So Scottish were encouraged to move to the Ulster region. So you had a lot of, in fact, after a while, the majority of the people in Ulster and Ireland were actually Scottish.
Yeah.
And they're often referred to as the Ulster Scots. So Mary's parents were Ulster Scots, her mother Elizabeth and her father James. You're
Yeah.
remembering that, right?
She was a Fulton, right? Her maiden name was Fulton.
Yes, it was.
Elizabeth
yeah. Well,
Fulton.
you remember this probably better than I do. But
I just reviewed it. I mean, recently.
yeah. So in the summer of 1720, they boarded a ship to come over, and that was part of a great migration of these Ulster Scots coming to America from about 1717 into the 1720s. In fact, they say that somewhere in the neighborhood of like 27 million Americans have some
Oh,
Ulster Scots blood in
yeah.
them.
I
So
can
it
see
was
that
a
now.
it was a really important major migration. So there,
Was her father, I mean, yeah, was Wilson, James Wilson, the sea captain or not?
no,
Okay,
they were
there
just
was one author saying that,
No.
and I wasn't sure if I missed something.
no,
Okay,
no. There's
it wasn't his
people
ship.
say a lot of things about the story that are totally
Just want to get it straight.
totally off base. No, her parents were just regular people, if anything, lower class, who decided to try to make a better life in America, like a
And-
lot of these people, because it was a tough life over there.
It was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So they were all given a claim of land, all the
This is correct,
passengers
yes.
on the ship,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they
All
were promised.
600 acres each, is that right?
I think it was like 60 acres each, wasn't
So,
it?
60?
I think so, if I remember that correctly.
Okay, well, this still is a nice piece of land.
Maybe I'm remembering that wrong. I don't know.
I could be wrong too.
I didn't know I was gonna have to
But they
remember
were
all
all
these
given
figures.
the same amount of a claim
Yes,
in
yes.
the new land.
I know that the
Okay.
Wilsons' claim ended up being divided with somebody else, so they only got half of the claim they were originally promised. But in any case, they were heading over on a ship. No accounts of this that had ever been written ever named the ship, or if they did, it was made up. But through my research, I'm pretty positive it was a ship called the Essex. And most
Oh,
accounts
not
say
the
they came
Wolf.
to Boston, but I think they actually came to Salem, Mass.
Yeah.
But anyway, on the way over, approximately a half to 2/3 of the way across the Atlantic, the ship was boarded by pirates. And I skipped a really important part of this, is that Elizabeth, Mary's mother, was pregnant when they left
Right.
Ireland. So the ship was boarded by pirates when Elizabeth was very well along in her pregnancy, but the baby was not really due yet. And it's believed that the stress of this pirate attack kind of brought on labor.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth had the baby on the ship as the pirates were ransacking the ship. And the pirates, they took all the belongings from the people on the ship, and they were apparently or possibly going to kill everybody on the ship,
Yeah.
as pirates were
Do
wont to do.
that sort of thing. Yeah.
And but then the pirate captain saw the newborn baby, and they said, a lot of the writers will say, like, his heart melted at the sight of the newborn baby. And he told the mother, Elizabeth, he said, "I will spare everybody on the ship if you promise me that you will name your daughter, your baby, Mary." And depending on which version of the story you read, Mary was the pirate's mother's name, or his wife's name, or his sister's name, or whatever. But anyways, possibly somebody
loved
important in
one.
his life.
Yeah.
And so obviously Elizabeth promised to name her baby Mary. She didn't have a whole lot of choice. And then the pirate captain ordered his men to bring gifts from the pirate ship to Elizabeth, including a bundle of silk from China that was later used to make Mary's wedding dress. And possibly some jewelry and things like that too. Probably everything I just said is true. Some of the details of the pirate attack we don't know for
Yeah.
certain. But a pirate attack did happen, from
Yep.
my research, on the Essex. And Mary was born at sea, and apparently, right at the time of the pirate attack. So they landed at Salem. Mary's father died right after they came. They landed. Again, a lot of sources say Boston, but my research showed that the Essex came into Salem. They're pretty close together.
Right,
so-
yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost the same
So
port.
her father, James, died soon after that. The family, she and her mother apparently spent a little time, not much time before they went to Londonderry, and her
Within
mother.
2 years, right?
Yeah, probably not much time. And her mother remarried a deacon,
James
Deacon
Clark.
yeah.
Yeah.
And Mary eventually married when she was in her early 20s to James Wilson, so she became Mary Wilson. So I don't know how much longer you wanted me to go on here, but
Well-
what I just said are pretty much the basic facts. We also know a lot about Mary's descendants. We know that she had 8 children. She and her husband had 8 children.
So many accounts say only 5.
She had 8, but only 5 lived to adulthood,
So do you think that's why they do that?
I guess.
They
yeah.
I
But
suppose.
but she
They
did
were
have 8 children. She had
non-entities.
4 sons and 4
Yeah.
daughters. And some of them became quite prominent, especially 2 of her sons.
Well, let me interrupt right
Mm-hmm.
here because at the end of the book, you do put in a note, I think it was a rendition by Cogswell, and he mentions that note, Mary had married Thomas Wallace in 1738, 4 years before she married his son James. What do you think about that?
I don't remember that.
Oh, you don't? It's at
No.
the very end of the book.
I say that in the book?
Well, Cogswell said it actually in his rendition of what happened. And it's under note.
Huh.
I will find that.
Okay.
So I'm wondering,
You've got me.
Well,
you've got me. It's
because
been more than 10 years since I wrote the book, so
there's
this
been
may be
a-
a detail that I've forgotten.
a name discrepancy does come up when Hans Holzer goes to investigate.
Oh, well, many
But different
discrepancies kind of came up
names,
through
but-
Hans Holzer. Some of the investigators, we'll probably talk about that, but the paranormal investigators who looked into this came up with all kinds of stuff.
Might I say this to you?
Sure.
Okay, page 119, note. Mary married Thomas Wallace's son, James, in 1742. Wait a minute. Sometime early in the
Oh.
year of 1738, Thomas Wallace immigrated to America and settled in Londonderry, where on December 18th of the same year, he was married to Ocean Bond Mary by Reverend Davidson. And we're talking Thomas Wallace. And then he goes on to say that she married Thomas's son James in 1742.
Well, I added that note in brackets, Mary married Thomas Wallace's son James in 1742. So that, I'm saying that he was incorrect in what he wrote
Oh, you were just correcting him. Oh,
there.
okay.
Yeah. So,
So I was saying, why would she marry the father, who's probably a good 25 to 30 years older than she?
no. He made a
Okay.
mistake. He had the wrong
The
Wallace
wrong-
there.
Okay.
Yeah.
That
she
makes a lot
married-
more
She
sense.
married James, who was the son
Again,
of
things
Thomas.
can be so twisted and
Yes.
embellished.
Well,
and-
that's a lot of what I wrote about, and
Yeah.
I point out a lot in the book how, it's history. Writing about history in general is full of traps, and
Yeah.
once something gets written by somebody, it starts getting repeated, and it
Yep.
becomes fact and
yeah,
quotes.
becomes fact.
And the internet, I think, makes it even worse.
So we don't,
mm-hmm.
we stand on the fact that she got married in 1742, not 38.
As far as my research,
Well, it would make sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of this, it's a long time ago. I wouldn't. It's hard for me to stake my life on any of the facts except
Well,
for the bare bones.
We're talking the highest likelihood of what
yes,
happened.
I believe she was married in 1742
Okay.
to James
And
Wallace.
with James, she had the 8
8
children.
kids, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'll just throw in this interesting side fact, is that when her mother, Elizabeth, remarried this Deacon Clark, they had children. So there were Mary's
So she has-
half
yep,
siblings, and
step-kids.
one of their descendants was Horace Greeley,
Yeah,
the famous
that's interesting.
writer and politician. So there's a
Yeah.
connection to him too.
So one of the Clarks. And also, Mother Elizabeth there, she went and she used the bolt of fabric to make her wedding dress.
That, according to at least one account, I can't vouch for that, but
Yeah.
I believe it was. Yeah,
Well, why let a good piece of cloth go to waste?
it
Exactly.
was probably used multiple times.
I'm sure, and
Yeah.
that's great. Okay, so
Yeah,
they lived in Londonderry from 1722 up to, what, 1791 when he passed away, when James passed away?
James passed away. I think 1891 is correct.
1791,
is
yeah.
correct, and then it was a few years later, and I'd have to check on the dates, but I believe it was several years later that she moved in with one
98.
of her sons, with her son William.
Yep.
Not her son Robert, who
Right.
built the house that everybody knows as the Ocean-born Mary house. So this is where a lot of confusion comes in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
rightfully so.
So I don't know if we want to jump into that.
Well,
now, but-
sure. Yeah, why don't
Yeah.
we?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned before, Mary had 8 kids in all, but 2 of her sons became quite prominent, especially Robert, who was
Yep.
the oldest son, who, and by the way, her sons, Robert and William, were described as really tall, like well over 6 feet, 6'4"
Yeah.
or so, which is kind of unusual, I think, for that time. And Robert became a judge and politician. He was a state representative. He was a selectman, among other things. So very, very active, and his brother William also very active in local affairs.
Yep.
But Robert, they say, had kind of a regal bearing, and he would ride a coach to church, you know, and he was very well known in the area. So he had a house built in Henniker, kind of on the outskirts of the town. It's not near the center of the town, as you know, you've been there.
How did they get those horses up that hill? I mean, that was a steep hill.
Yeah,
Steeple
I'm
Hill
sure it was
Road?
quite a, it took 2 years to build the house. You can understand
Yeah.
why, because it's fairly remote. So 1784 to 86, I
To
believe, is when the
86,
house
yeah.
was built. And it's a beautiful mansion, really, that a lot of people tended to say, oh, it was built by a sea captain, because it looks like a fairly typical sea captain's
Yeah.
house. But Henniker is not a seaport.
It's not.
No, and Robert Wallace was not a sea captain, but he
Right.
apparently, he wanted a house in that style. He just liked the style. He probably based it on some of the houses like in Portsmouth and other places.
Yep.
In fact, there's a house in Portsmouth, in downtown Portsmouth,
Sherburne?
looks very much like it. Yeah, the
Yeah,
Sherburne
on Deer
house.
Street, I think.
Exactly, yeah,
I've
yeah.
got to go and check that out, because I'd really like to know what he was
It's a beautiful
after.
white house, and the architecture of those houses is classified as Georgian, and just gorgeous house.
Was there an insurance agency there? In that
There
house
was.
for a
I'm not sure
while?
what's in there currently. I haven't looked at it in a while.
But they had been there for quite some time.
The
and so I'm
insurance
wondering if
agency may still be in
that's
there.
the
I think it might
house.
be more than one company in there, but
A beautiful house.
it really is. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Then why do you suppose, I mean, even the floors went this way or this way? Either way, they were bowed. Mm-hmm. So down for the water to run off, supposedly?
Apparently,
Or
yeah,
would
it's
they
based
dip up?
on ships where for
Would be
that,
that way,
so
okay.
the water would run off exactly. So even down to that detail, it's based on sea captains' houses.
Yeah, kind of weird. What else was synonymous of a ship?
Well, I'm not sure about that. It's just that I think the overall architecture of the house, and not so
Hmm.
much similar to a ship, but similar to a lot of the sea captains' houses that were built in that era, just to
Oh, okay.
be a kind of
Okay.
a showpiece in a way, to show off that you're an important person.
And the architecture is really intricate and beautiful, so that cost a lot of money too.
Oh yeah,
You know,
yeah. So Robert was a very successful man.
Yes, he showed it.
But anyway, Mary went to live
Yeah.
with her son William in her old age, from about the time she was, I think, 78. Oh, yeah, it would have been 1798 to 1814 when she died.
Yeah, that's when she died.
Yeah, when she was 94 years old, right?
Yeah.
Which is unusual too, to live
Yeah.
that long. at
Having
that
all
time.
those kids and still living to 94?
Yeah. And by the way, let me just throw in Mary. There were descriptions of Mary when she was alive, that she was striking, that she was like 6 feet tall with red hair and blue eyes and ivory skin.
Feet,
So she was
though?
probably, at least one description said that she was 6 feet tall, but I don't know if, I wasn't there, I can't say for sure.
Yeah.
But she was, from all descriptions, she was tall.
Yeah.
And her sons were well over 6 feet, so she may very well have been. But
Do you think
a
she had the
striking
red
person.
hair?
From every account that I've read.
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Then they also mentioned that she was kind of quick-tempered, which often goes with the red hair. But she seemed to be, my impression of her was more regal than just, flying off a handle all the time.
I would say that's the impression I get. But again,
Yeah.
a lot of this is speculation. We don't know a whole lot about Mary
Yep,
herself.
no, this
we
is
really
a fact,
don't.
but we're just talking about
Yeah.
high likelihoods and possibilities.
Right. But again, she went to live with her son William in a nice house, but not as nice as his brother's
Yeah.
brother Robert's house. They were a few miles from each other. And she spent her last years at her son William's house.
Did
but
you find any pictures on William's house? I know it was burned in the 20s, but...
no.
No?
If I remember right, I really looked hard, and I don't think I might have found something like a really bad picture, but
Yeah.
nothing good.
Okay.
But anyway, later on, it's a little unclear when it started happening, but certainly by the early 1900s, people started saying that she lived in Robert Wallace's house, which is such a prominent house in that area.
Yeah.
and they started calling it the Ocean-Born Mary House. And there were postcards of it from that era that say Ocean-Born Mary House. And then, and I assume we're going to get into the longtime ownership of a man named Gussie Roy, and he really played up the Ocean-Born Mary
didn't he?
connection. He sure did, yeah. So,
I mean, it's a real possibility that people saw things happening there, like perhaps people standing in the windows. You know, it's an old place, and chances are, you know, it might have some energy, but it's not necessarily the way it was touted in the media.
right. I'll also, again, as you said, I've been involved in some investigations and stuff. I have a very open mind on this stuff. But in
Some
this
things got
case,
twisted.
I don't think we have any proof that there's anything really going on there. In fact, the present owners, who I've been in the house and talked to them,
Have you?
when I was working on the book, and they say they've owned it for quite a few years, and nothing except the squirrels on the walls. They said nothing unusual.
Well, they're probably both very insensitive.
That could be. That could be.
Like me?
But also, there was an earlier couple, the Russells, who actually bought the house from Gussie Roy, who owned it from 1916 into the 1960s. He sold it to this couple, David and Corrine Russell. And at first, they were into the haunted house thing. But then after a
seemed to
while,
be.
they were sick of all the attention it got and all the tourists that would show up, and especially on Halloween, it was a tradition.
Yeah.
But they didn't like all that attention anymore, so they put up signs saying this house is not haunted, leave us alone.
Oh, did they really
basically.
do that?
Oh yeah, they.
Oh my, I can
and
see
they,
why.
They denied. They said they
You
wanted
can't blame
absolutely
'em.
nothing to do with
I
it.
heard that thousands would come around Halloween. How much time we have?
We've got about a minute to the bottom of the
Okay,
hour.
so, all right, before we get into it, I'd really like to talk about what they say the ghosts were. What were the sightings that they were telling the newspapers? I think that's going to be very interesting. And we can also get into the supposed treasure.
Yeah.
Ooh, there was a treasure?
Well,
Supposed
maybe.
treasure.
Supposed treasure, yeah.
Yes.
They say
Yeah,
Yes,
they
they
say. They
say.
say a lot, don't they?
they do.
Because they keep tying in the fact that the house was built kind of like a ship or like a sea captain's, and perhaps there were sea captains involved in this house, and if there were, perhaps there was a secret passageway. But I'm thinking, why build a secret passageway if you can't smuggle anything in? Maybe Indian attack, but if it's not the Indian attack, it has to be the smuggling.
No secret passageways that I'm aware of in there.
Well, it was the
Well,
Russells
they're a
that
secret
thought.
if they are. So.
The
What's that?
Russells
They're a
thought.
secret if
They're
they
secret,
are.
right?
The Russells thought there was a secret room or passageway off of the loom room.
Okay.
So
Well, I know
we'll
there
leave
was
it there.
some thought that it maybe was involved in smuggling, but we'll.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can get into that too when we get back.
Okay, so I guess
right.
that's just about the bottom of the hour then. And we will be back in just a couple minutes.
Just a couple minutes.
All right.
Don't go away.
Don't go anywhere. Yeah, welcome back everybody. Edge of Reality TV. I'm Willie.
Here we
I
are.
almost forgot for a minute there. I'm Willie, she's Lynn, and our guest tonight is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome back, Jeremy.
Welcome
you.
back, Jeremy. Okay, so I think we left off talking about some of the possibility of the hauntings, at least what was commonly reported that happened there.
Well, I don't think anything was commonly reported until after this guy Gussie Roy bought the house. He bought it in 1916. He was
Okay.
quite a character, and especially starting in the 1920s and for the decades after that, I think it was mainly from him. He was getting things in the local newspapers about these strange happenings at the Ocean-Born Mary House.
He was a real promoter.
He was in the book. I call him the P.T. Barnum of
Truly, like
that
a circus
area.
barker, yeah.
Yeah, maybe not quite on as big a scale as P.T. Barnum, but he was like that. And in fact, he you know how Barnum famously said, "A sucker is born every minute." Gussie Roy said something like, "Nobody knows a millionth thing about anything." In other words, he thought people were kind of gullible. And,
Yeah.
but from all accounts, he was also a very interesting guy and a good tour guide. And
Heck of a photographer and an artist.
he was a great photographer. He
Yeah.
really was. He did black and white photography. He had his work in many museums and galleries and
Yeah.
stuff. And his mother, Flora, who lived with him in the house for many years, would dress in period clothes with a bonnet
Yeah.
and stuff like 19th century type clothes, and
And
he would
he would
photograph
photograph
her
her, yeah.
in settings that made it look, really old-timey, and he made Christmas cards out of those and stuff like that.
Very creative.
Yeah, and she very much took part in the promotion of the house, the Ocean-born Mary house. And
She became a liar too.
well, yeah, but it's also almost like she almost played the part of the ghost of Ocean-born Mary. Because people would come and do a tour, and at times it was almost like she presented herself like she was Ocean-born Mary giving the tour. But anyway, so one of the stories that started getting into the press starting in the 1920s was that people would see a horse-drawn coach pulling up in front of the house, and they would see the ghost of a woman, purportedly Ocean-born Mary, get out of the coach, and some accounts said that she would open cover to a well that was near the house and look into the well like she was looking for something, and that would disappear into the house. And there was stories that there was some kind of murder there, and she was looking for a body in the well, or there's
They
all
used
these.
to do that, so oddly enough. They throw a lot of bodies in the well.
Oh, I'm sure.
I just found that out myself.
Okay.
I didn't realize it was such a common occurrence.
Really? I didn't realize it was as
Yeah.
common either. But that story got repeated many times. But there are a lot of stories of people seeing somebody in the windows and stuff like that. In fact, jumping ahead back to the 1960s, when I was a kid and my friend would go there with his family, I remember him telling me that a friend of his mother, when they were about to leave the place, took a picture of an upstairs window and later looked at it, and there was a figure in it that she thought she didn't
See, it can happen.
Yeah, well, it might have been an actual person in the window, but anyway, that she was convinced it was a ghost. So that was a common story too. But so Gussie Roy, kind of came up with these stories and kind of rolled with, it's snowballed from there basically, and he kept embellishing it. And he said that, he claimed that the pirate from the original story that had robbed the ship that Ocean-born Mary and her parents came over on, that pirate had then built the house in Henniker, that house,
Yeah.
which didn't make a lot of sense.
No.
Because he would have to have been like over 100 years old, and there was no reason for it. And according to Gussie Roy, the pirate built the house, and then Mary, who was widowed, went to live there with her children at the house as well. And none of that was true.
Yeah.
But he actually wrote, Gussie Roy in the 30s, I think it was 1935, wrote his own version, sort of kind of like a short story or a short novel about Ocean-born Mary, and really, really embellished everything and had like a backstory about the characters. He made up a lot of names, and he called the pirate Don Pedro in the story. He had Don Pedro rob the ship and then build the house, and he claimed that Don Pedro buried a treasure in the house.
Right.
He also claimed that buried a treasure either in the house
Yeah.
or on the grounds,
Yeah.
possibly on the grounds. And he claimed that another pirate or pirates came to the house looking for the treasure and killed Don Pedro, possibly another pirate captain.
Well, isn't that part of the story of Hans Holzer's medium Sybil Leek? She came up with that.
No, not really. She came up with all kinds of wild stuff that just didn't make any sense at all.
That the captain was Johnny and that he was murdered by the rum runners
Something
looking
like
for the
that.
money.
Yeah, and she said there was a Mary Deegan. She had the,
Right,
And
yeah.
she said, well, I could go off on kind of a tangent here, but anyway, the fact that Gussie Roy, when he wrote his story called The Pirate Don Pedro, that got picked up by a lot of writers later on. So
Yep.
often you'll see other accounts of the story saying that the pirate who robbed the ship was Don Pedro, but that's just, Gussie Roy made that up.
Yeah.
There was also a book written in that same year, 1935, by a popular author named Lois Lenski,
Oh,
who wrote children's books and books for like young adults. She wrote a popular book called Strawberry Girl, among others. And she wrote a book called Ocean-born Mary in 1935.
all right.
But in that book, Mary is like a teenager and she's living in Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
Yeah, it's purely fiction.
Absolutely fiction, other than the name Oceanborn Mary and that she was supposed to have been born on a ship.
Yeah.
Everything was made up. It's about her life in Portsmouth, when the real Mary never lived in Portsmouth. But in Lois Lenski's book, the pirate is called Philip Babb, B-A-B-B. There really was a Philip Babb. He was a constable in the Isles of Shoals off the New Hampshire coast. He was a real person, but the dates of his life don't fit into the story. And also Lois Lenski herself admitted that she just made the names. She just saw that name somewhere and liked
Picked
it
it
and
up,
just used
yeah.
it. But you'll see in some accounts of the story to this day, you'll see it'll say the pirate was Philip Babb, but it wasn't Philip Babb or.
Oh, you don't think so?
No.
Okay.
No. So we can get into that, but anyway, so I'm just making the point that all these embellishments started happening starting in the 1920s and 30s and right up into the 1960s. Gussie Roy owned the house until 1962.
Don't forget, he charged and handed out
Yes.
shovels to
Yes.
people to dig for treasure
Yeah,
in the yard.
he certainly didn't get rich off it, but he did make money off it. He charged, I think for a long time he was charging $0.25 for a tour of the house. And for a while, he was charging, I think it was 50 cents
Really?
to give
To
people
dig?
a shovel and let them dig in the yard for treasure.
Yeah.
So his yard had holes all dug up in it. One time, a psychic came there who supposedly was really good at finding treasure and things like that, and used a divining rod
Oh,
and
really?
walked around the yard for hours. And every time the rod would point down, somebody would dig where it was pointing. And there were like several different places. He said there's something there. And when they dug, they found a horseshoe and some old nails.
Oh, funny.
So actually, it's sort of impressive that he was able to use the divining rod and find
Yeah.
metal in the ground,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but no treasure. Didn't find any treasure. But people from far and wide came trying to find treasure there. And as I say in the book, if there's anybody listening to this who is into treasure hunting, do not go to that house looking for treasure.
No, they live
because
there.
it's all made up stuff. And also,
privately
it's a
owned.
private house, and
Private
you'll be
property, yeah.
arrested pretty quickly if you try to
Oh,
dig
yeah.
in the yard.
What do you think about the eagle that was drawn in the entryway? He said that Mary painted it, and my feeling is I think he painted it.
He's at least restored it. I guess it was
Oh.
faint, and he had it. I don't know if he did it
Okay.
himself. He was an artist too.
Right. That's
I'm not
why
quite
I'm
sure if he
thinking.
restored that eagle on the wall himself or had somebody do it, but he claimed that Mary drew it, which is possible. But there also used to be traveling artists who would do things like that as decorations in
Yeah.
houses. It was more likely done by somebody like that.
Did you see anything in the research that indicated that Mary had some sort of artistic flair? Yeah, that's why I'm thinking
She probably didn't draw it, but I can't say for sure.
no, but it seems like there's a high likelihood that Gussie might have ran with that story too.
Yeah. He was an amazing character.
He really was.
He was. That was my. I mean, this was all interesting trying to, find the meat on the bones of this story.
Yeah.
And like I just said during our break, there's like an onion. You're peeling away layers of an onion and trying to find the center of it. But when I started reading about Gussie Roy and all the accounts of him from people who did tours with him and everything else, and people who knew him well, he was a really interesting character. Again, he was a great photographer. He really was talented. He was kind of a small guy, very athletic and fit, and did yoga. There's a picture. I have a picture in the book that came from an article about him, where he's standing on his head to show off how fit he was. He said he never bathed or showered,
Yeah.
but he would he would get in the bathtub. He would fill the bathtub with popcorn, and take a bath in the popcorn.
That doesn't make any sense to me. He must have
I
jumped
think
in
he
the
ate the
river.
popcorn from around him as he was lying there. So
How could people stand to be around him?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't answer that. But he also would do nude sunbathing in the yard,
Nude?
even when that was. As I mentioned before, this couple, the Russells, bought the house from him in 1962, but they allowed him to continue living in the house. So he lived there for several more years until he
Yeah,
died.
they must have made some kind of arrangement when they sold the house that he could do that.
Yeah. So, but he would still, after he didn't own the house anymore, he would sunbathe nude in the yard, and Mrs. Russell would have her lady friends over, and they were quite shocked,
I would think.
taken aback by that. So,
And then he wouldn't take a shower if he got all sweaty.
well, that's what they say.
That's what they say.
Yeah.
Okay.
The popcorn kind of sucks the dirt out. You know?
Maybe it did.
Does it now?
I don't know. I haven't tried it.
I
so-
don't either.
So, who do you suppose was the captain, the pirate, that came on board the ship? We did
That's
lot
a
of-
really interesting, that's the last section of my book deals with that, and that was a lot of fun to try to put that together, because you read all these accounts, this story appears in a lot of collections of like New England folklore,
Yeah,
or
Yankee
ghost stories.
Magazine.
It's often told as a ghost story, and often the pirate is said to be, as I said, Don Pedro or
Yeah.
Philip Babb, but those are both fictional, from fictional accounts originally, so definitely wasn't either of those names. So I thought, well, maybe it's possible for me to figure out who the pirate captain actually was. And my research found that there was a ship in the summer of 1720, in July of 1720, that was coming from Northern Ireland to Massachusetts, Salem, actually, and that it was attacked by pirates. It was captured. It was robbed by pirates off of Newfoundland. So, and there are newspaper accounts of that.
Yeah.
And it says at least one account said Captain Thomas Roberts. So,
Oh, yes. Bartholomew.
well, yeah. So when I saw Roberts, I thought, oh, that's interesting, because probably the most famous, not the most famous, but the most successful pirate in the golden age of piracy around that time was Bartholomew Roberts. He actually captured more than 400 ships. As far as the number of ships, he was more successful than Blackbeard or Captain Kidd or anybody
Yeah.
else in that era.
In what, 3 years
In
or something?
3 years, yeah, 1719 to 22.
400 crap.
He was
yeah.
busy.
He was killed in battle in 1722. So he had a short career as a pirate, but over 400 ships captured. He was quite a character. They say he loved to dress in really fancy clothes with a feather in his hat and everything else. He only drank tea. He didn't drink alcohol.
Is that a picture of him on the cover, supposedly?
Yes, it is.
Yes?
Yeah, that's
Very
from a drawing. I
interesting.
believe that's from a famous book that was a history of the
You might
pirates
want
by
to show it to
I think it was Charles Johnson who wrote the book. I don't know if
the camera over
if
here.
that could be seen on camera.
So Thomas
Roberts.
Bartholomew Roberts.
Yeah,
went
he
by
actually was born
Bartholomew.
John Roberts. He
Oh.
was Welsh, and he was born John Roberts, but he used different names at different times. So he was known as Thomas, but he mainly went by Bartholomew.
He wasn't so much a cutthroat that he always wanted to kill everybody, but he did kill people.
He did. He definitely killed people.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. It wasn't like he was a really nice guy.
No.
But he was a little different from the. I mean, I'm sure there are all kinds of pirates.
Yep.
There's certain stereotypes we
Good
have.
pirates
Yep.
and bad pirates.
Well, I don't know about that. They're all more or less bad, I would
Dark
say.
and then gray. And
But again, he was a teetotaler and kind of a fancy dresser and all that.
had a high opinion of himself, I'm sure.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, he wanted to command every ship that he took over. He'd assimilate the captains of the ship,
Yeah.
right, and take the ships.
I think that was fairly common.
Yeah, was it?
I think so, yeah. But anyway, so, but then I wondered, I saw that the ship, supposedly according to accounts at the time, was attacked on July 17th, 1720.
Oh, interesting.
And
yes.
so I cross-checked that with Mary's date of birth. And later in Londonderry, when she was an adult, apparently every year they would have some kind of a celebration for her birthday on July 28th, kind of celebrating the fact that she and her parents survived that voyage and survived the pirate attack and all that. So that didn't match up, July 17th for the pirate attack and July 28th for her birth. But then I was discussing this story with a friend of mine, William Marshall, And he said, well, did you take into account the fact that the calendar changed
1752?
by 11 days? In England, in England and in America, the change was done in 1752. Yeah, so it was well after
So,
that, after
But if you
1720.
figure, but wouldn't that make a lag of 11 days each year, or was it each year it was 11 days?
No, it was total. It was 11 days. Can I read a paragraph
Yeah,
from
please.
my book? Because I sometimes I have a little trouble keeping it straight in my mind, so it's better if I read.
And
Let me.
the 11-day difference makes sense for 1 year.
No, it wasn't for 1 year. It was for total.
But I mean, if it was accumulative, it would have been more than 11 days. So I was wondering, how did they figure that? Because if it changed in 1752 and she was born in 1720, there would have been all those years in between where you would have acquired.
It didn't
enough
work
of-
that way. It was just
Okay.
11 days total.
Okay.
And I'm not sure I can explain that part of it, how they decided that.
Okay.
That's a little mysterious to me. There's
Yeah,
probably
me
people
too.
watching this who may have a better understanding. But let me just read
Yes.
this from my book. The accounts state that the pirates boarded the Essex on July 17th. Tradition tells us that Mary was born 11 days later on July 28th. There's an essential factor that might resolve this discrepancy. When Mary was born, much of the world were still using the Julian or Old Style calendar. The Gregorian or New Style calendar had been created and adopted in many countries starting in 1582, but England, and presumably the Ulster Scots, and the American colonies didn't officially adopt the reformed calendar until 1752. In order to make the calendar adjustment in England and the American colonies, 11 days were dropped from the month of September 1752.
Okay.
So it was just done that one time.
Yeah.
A check of the Boston Newsletter in 1720 indicates they were still using the old style of dating. I figured that out for sure, that they were using the old style. Thus, the reported date of July 17th for the pirate assault on the Essex translates to July 28th, New Style dating.
Yeah.
According to the accounts, as I said, later Mary's birthday was celebrated on July 28th. But if that was New Style dating, it actually meant she was born on July 17th, Old Style.
Yeah.
It's kind of confusing,
Yeah.
but it meshed.
Yeah.
And I thought, eureka. It seemed to make a lot of sense. It all added up.
Yes.
It seemed to me pretty definite, pretty close to 100% definite that Bartholomew Roberts,
And he would have died 2 years later. So if the timeline matches
well, he
up
was
too.
he was in the middle of a reign of terror off Newfoundland at that time.
Wasn't he kind of stationed out of Newfoundland?
He was waiting for these ships coming
To
over.
come by, yeah.
He got a whole bunch of them around that time, and this fit right into that.
Wow.
Yeah. So I can't prove it 100%.
High
but
likelihood.
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure that Bartholomew Roberts, the very famous Bartholomew Roberts, was the pirate who robbed the ship
Wow.
that Oceanborn Mary was born on.
And-
And there was also one of the things written about him is that he sometimes gave gifts to people that he
True.
would rob them, but then he would give them stuff.
Oh, and he would sometimes give the captains for being accommodating. He'd give back something to them.
Yeah,
it was-
but obviously in the case of Mary's mother, it was the sight of the newborn
bolt of
baby that prompted him to give
cloth.
them gifts.
Yeah.
So that fit in too with things that
Yeah.
were written about him. So it all kind of meshed in together.
And was there a mention of the name of the ship in this case? His ship? Or
In
their
the contemporary accounts of the pirate attack, it said
Essex,
the
you
Essex,
said.
and that
That's
was
right. Yeah.
I'm sorry, the Essex was the ship they were on.
Right.
It doesn't. It just says pirate. It mentions the pirate captain being Roberts. It does not mention his ship, which I believe at that time would have been the Good Fortune, was his flagship.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which he
perpetual
had
good
captured,
fortune.
of course. And he also captured a French ship that was like the sort of the smaller, like the second ship to his flagship that was captained by a Frenchman. I believe La Palisse was the man's name who was believed to be that captain. And there, let me just say it's possible that La Palisse was the captain who actually came on the Essex.
It could
That's
be.
possible. It seems more likely to me that it was Roberts because he was the head
Yeah.
of the whole, he was in charge of the whole thing. But
Yeah, I agree
can't
with
rule
you.
out the possibility that French captain who was like second in command could have
Yeah.
been the one.
They all grumbled because they couldn't get the goods, the pirates, the seamen. I would imagine they grumbled. because Roberts gave in. Okay, well, given that, how about when Hans Holzer, who always investigated, a lot of paranormal situations, when he went twice, once with the medium Lori and then again
Yeah,
with
well, I think he
Sybil
was there
Leek.
a bunch of times, yeah.
But in particular, they were highlighting, or you were highlighting, Lori's visit with Holzer and then Sybil Leek's
Yeah,
visit.
yeah.
And Lori's visit, I couldn't get a whole lot out of, but 'cause it seemed to me she was supposed to be channeling Mary, but she made Mary sound awfully grumpy and bossy. And Lori couldn't come up with any good answers because she'd always say that Mary was being uncooperative.
It was pretty fragmentary, I think.
It was.
Yeah. I just want to mention, too, that before Hans Holzer investigated, the famous Ed and Lorraine Warren were also there.
Oh, yes, please tell us about
Yeah,
that.
but there's not much to report on that because it was one of the first, it was when they were first getting into paranormal stuff. That
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of viewers know who Ed and Lorraine Warren were.
They were-
I believe she's still alive.
She recently passed away.
she recently passed away?
Yeah,
Okay, I
a
wasn't
few
aware.
months ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. There's been a few movies based on them and everything.
Yeah.
From Connecticut. It's kind of controversial. Some people think they're great, some people don't. But anyway, they went to the so-called Oceanborn Mary house, and supposedly Lorraine Warren astral projected when they went in the house, and she
Oh,
said that she
that's
was
right.
like she was looking at everybody from up above, from the ceiling. And that's about all they had to say about
Yeah.
that, which to me, okay, so
Yeah.
what
What does
caused
that
that, and
accomplish?
what
Yeah.
does that have to do with any possible hauntings or whatever? So they were there, which is interesting. But then Hans Holzer was another very famous researcher there in the early 60s, and he had the psychic, we don't know what the psychic's real name was. He used the name Laurie, but that was made up. And again, yeah, the stuff she came up with was very, very fragmentary, but he felt that she got too consumed by it. She was kind of obsessed with it.
She was.
And she lived, I guess, a good distance away. And one time she found herself driving to the house in the middle of the night in her nightgown. And she
Yeah.
realized, she's like, what am I doing here? She
She's
went
in
back
a
home.
trance and or sleep driving.
Something like that.
Or
So
sleepwalking.
I think, I don't know if it was partly that, he decided, well, I'm going to take her off the case. And he brought in, as you said, Sybil Leek,
Yep.
the really famous witch and psychic writer, wrote many books on the paranormal in England. So she was there on, I think, at least one, but I think more than one occasion. She brought her pet boa constrictor.
I know. What's
Yeah.
her?
Hans Holzer said that it was less repulsive than he thought it would be.
Yeah.
But she came up with some pretty bizarre stuff. She came up with all these names. She was saying that a Mary Deegan lived there, but then she said Mary Birch.
Yeah.
But, Mary was Mary Wallace, and so I don't know where those names came from. She came up with some other weird names, too. There was a Johnny, I think she said was a captain or something.
Yeah, something flood, Johnny
And
something flood.
Hans Holzer, he thought that the pirate in the case was Philip Babb. He picked that up from, as I said, from some of the false accounts. But he said, is there a Philip Babb? And Sybil Leek said yes, and she seemed to think that he was the son of Mary. He said,
Oh.
he's a little boy in the other room or something like that. So it just was kind of nuts. And she said that there was treasure or something buried. I don't know if she said treasure. Said there was something buried on the grounds near the lion's head, I believe is what she said. And I guess there was a rock that kind of looked like a lion's head, so I think some digging was done there.
And there are a bunch of irises around the rock. So there were 3 rocks apparently, and she found the area, and it was away from the house a little bit. So I don't know if they dug there or not.
I believe they did. but
Really?
Nothing, no results.
Also, the ghost told her that it was down about the height of a small boy. So what's that, 4 feet maybe? So who knows?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's odd that she came up with the idea that there was something buried, supposedly buried treasure on
Well,
the
I don't know if
grounds.
Hans Holzer actually brought up that idea with her. I'm not sure if she just
With the
came
treasure?
up with that psychically. It's not clear to me whether he suggested that to her.
Well, Jonathan Harrison Flood, that's who Mary Deegan was bringing up. But Mary Deegan, which I think was the maid, at least coming through as a maid, said that her name was Birch, right?
I think she said it was the same person, right? But then she said that Mary Wallace was the same person. She said she used different names.
Yeah.
So
and
I don't-
she was only married once, supposedly, so why would she have all these different last names?
Right, right.
It didn't make sense.
Yeah, I don't, you know, Sybil Leek may have had some good, you know, results in other cases. I don't really know enough about her. I know that she was quite an eccentric person,
Yeah.
very interesting. And I'm sure, you know, I've never read her books. They're probably very interesting. But in this case, aside from anything else she ever did, I think it was nonsense, basically.
Well, you know what? I feel she might have been picking up on something that was factual. There might have been a Mary Deegan. Deegan, okay. She could have been a maid. She could have been Robert's maid. Who knows? She might have been picking up something factual, but there was the pretense that Oceanborn Mary lived there. So that's the connection that was being made.
Right, and she never did live there
No,
anyway.
she didn't. She might have come to visit, and who
Yeah.
knows, maybe Mary was fond of the house, but I just don't
Yeah.
see that
But what'll-
experience substantiates her being one of the ghosts.
Right. But one of the interesting things I've thought about with all this, and I'm sure you guys have thought about this in other cases too, is whether, you know, Hans Holzer had preconceived notions about this place. He believed that Oceanborn Mary lived there. He
Yeah.
believed that the pirate built the
Yeah.
house and the pirate buried treasure somewhere. So even if he didn't tell these psychics all that stuff, is it possible they're picking up on things from his mind? That they-
Perhaps subconsciously from
Yeah.
Hans Holzer, could be.
So I have to wonder about that, whether she was getting some of the names and things from
Yep.
stuff that was in his brain. So,
We got about 2 minutes.
Well, it's a real tangled web that's been woven. So,
it is.
how do you feel? Do you feel that the house was haunted?
No.
Not at all?
Well, I have no reason to think that because, again, the present owners have been there a long time and say nothing at all. And the owners, the longtime owners, the Russells, said that there was nothing there, and they published a statement and they put out an official statement. The house is not haunted. Leave us alone, basically.
Well, I do know that Mr. Russell said they had never seen anything. Mr. Russell was drawn to the Lafayette room, which I think was the loom room, wasn't it? He liked that room. And the other thing was when they first moved in, she dropped a heater that was turned on down the stairs, and it caught fire, and it seemed to be snuffed out as if a blanket
Right.
had been thrown over it. But that was the extent of their paranormal
Right, right.
experiences.
Well, anyway, you know, maybe there's something,
Maybe
there
there's
have been
something
things that
there.
have gone on there over the years, but I think the vast bulk of what's believed, you know, the stuff that's been written about the place was made up by Gussie Roy and kind of, you know, embellished by other people too along the way. But it's, you know, it's all fun. I don't mean to destroy the romance of the place because, I mean, the true story behind it is really interesting.
It is.
And,
And he certainly, Gussie Roy did bring attention to Henniker.
oh yeah,
And then the whole history of Mary, not that it was all completely factual.
yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, I just want to quickly mention that a good friend of mine, Holly Hansen, who's part of a folk duo called Neptune's Car, do folk music. She wrote a song, Oceanborn Mary. People might want to look that up. You can hear it like on Apple Music or whatever.
Neptune's Car, does she still currently play?
They haven't recorded an album in a few years now, but she's a beautiful singer and songwriter, and she wrote the song Oceanborn Mary. That's largely based on the legends, but it's a really nice song.
Yeah.
So I just want to put in a plug for that too.
Neptune's Car.
Yeah, named for a clipper ship, a real it's
Oh,
an
was it?
interesting story behind that.
Yeah, it'd be fun to listen to that, and you can probably hear it on the internet, right?
I'm sure you can
Yeah.
track it down pretty easily, yeah.
So we're just about out of time here.
So, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Oh, well, real quickly, I'll mention I do obviously
yeah.
mostly lighthouse stuff. So we have a Zoom event for the U.S. Lighthouse Society this Saturday. When are people going to be seeing this?
After this Saturday,
It'll
Oh,
probably
okay.
be after the event.
How about the
don't-
following Saturday, the 25th?
maybe.
Possibly.
Okay. Well, we have Zoom events the next 2 Saturdays for the U.S. Lighthouse Society, 4 p.m. If you go to the U.S. Lighthouse Society Facebook page, you'll find information. I'm also leading a tour for the Society in May of Long Island, New York for a week, May 13th to 20th.
Oh.
And we're trying to get people to sign up for that.
And how would people contact you to get in on that?
If they go to uslhs.org, all the information's on there.
Society for Lighthouse
It stands for U.S. Lighthouse Society.
Society, okay. And what about the New England Lights? That's your website, but how is that affiliated? I mean, that is your website?
That's my own personal website,
Okay.
NewEnglandLighthouses.net. I work for the U.S. Lighthouse Society. I do a podcast, a weekly podcast called Lighthearted, 2 words. Done over 200 episodes. It's so much fun.
And people get information on the podcast on your website then, any lights, or New England?
Yeah, but also if they go to uslhs.org, the podcast is posted on the front page of the website as well.
Okay, because I got to check that out too.
But any podcast app, they can listen to it. It's real easy to find.
Great. And you pretty much interview other people who own or run lighthouses or tour them?
Ex-keepers, family members of keepers, authors, historians, preservationists, et cetera, just
Great.
from all over the world.
Wow.
It's
Cool.
I love it.
Captivating. Is that the end of the show?
That's
Oh, no.
the end of the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeremy.
You're so welcome. Thank you
Thank
for
you,
having me.
Jeremy.
It's my pleasure.
Great, and bring this book back alive. I mean, you published it in 2010. People should take a look at that. Such interesting information.
It's still available. It's still in print.
Yeah.
Yep, I just bought it, so I know it is.
It's on Amazon and other places. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so
Thank
that's
you.
that's the show. And
Thank
we
you.
will talk to you again next month, I guess, huh? What do you think?
Yeah.
All right.
We'll let you
Sounds-
know.
Sounds like a plan.
Thanks again, Jeremy.
Good night,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good night, everyone.